Chris, welcome to the SRMC Tribe Podcast. I know obviously you work for Frontier. A good way of starting these off is where we kind of know you from, where we kind of met, and a bit about your sort of story. I think we first met when you did the SRMC course in 2018 as a student. Yeah,
I was working in Algeria at the time and came across, it was like mid 2018 and did the SRMC in York, yeah.
And obviously a few years later you come and, we secured a large overseas contract consultancy project that you now head up, which we may go into later in the podcast. But obviously one of the, part of all the podcasts, this is the one I've been looking forward to most, all the ones we got lined up. I've always been fascinated with the French Foreign Legion. It was something I thought about when I went up before I joined the Marines in my teens, read a few books around it. And even though I know quite a bit, I'm still fascinated when you sort of spin the stories. It's got a bit of mystique and of why people do it in the first place, kind of a little bit of like a private military in some ways, which I'm sure the viewers or people who don't know much about it will be interested in what that is and why your story and why you ended up joining the French Foreign Legion and obviously the things you've done post that. But if you want to start off, mate, of maybe your childhood and how you went into that.
I mean, I grew up in sort of Selby in North Yorkshire, sort of not a lot around there really. Sort of it's in the crossroads between Leeds, York, Hull and Doncaster.
It might work out with the accent, mate.
And luckily when I speak French, I've got a French accent, so people often mistake me for French. Growing up sort of thing, at a loose end, sort of, left school, college and thought, what shall I do? Weigh up the options. Can be sort of cold, wet and miserable in Wales somewhere or, warm and exotic in the south of France, and went, I quite fancy a bit of warm and exotic. And obviously you see the image of the Legion and think, that'd be great, it'll be a bit like the army adverts, isn't it? You'll get sent somewhere warm and exotic on the beaches and whatnot and have a great time. So, off I went. I remember
Sorry, where did you see it wasn't something really known?
I remember seeing, it was a Panorama documentary or something, and it was about the time of Simon Murray, who wrote the famous book Legionnaire. One of the sort of World in Action or something, and he was narrating it. And I remember seeing that as a kid, probably about 10 years old, and thought, that sounds amazing, Go across, they've got all these exotic places far-flung around the world, have an adventure. So I thought, yeah. And then I bought the book Mouthful of Rocks by Christian Jennings, read that one, and that sort of didn't put me off, despite the fact that, he sort of had a disastrous time and I'd sort of, it was sort of the book that put you off going. I thought, no, that sounds quite good. Have an adventure, go for it.
Now, how do you join the Legion?
So there's about 13 recruiting centres all spread over France, or you can technically go up to any police officer and ask them, and they'll sort of direct you there. So I'd looked, and there's a big one in Paris called Fort de Nogent.
Oh, so you can't do it from here, you literally got to go over to...
you've got to go over there. So I went to Fort de Nogent in Paris, and it got the ferry across. I remember getting off I'd got the Eurostar, the coach across to Paris, getting off in Paris and walking up to the information desk, and there was a list of signs of where various buses was, and she just looked at me and pointed to the one that said Legion étrangère and went, that one? And I went, yeah, and she went, over there. Got sort of the bus and got off at this sort of middle of like housing estate in Paris and up a hill, and there's a big earthen wall fort and a big huge set of wooden doors, something like you sort of imagine from like the Napoleonic era. Go knock on the door, little hatch opens, man looks at you, what are you here for? Foreign Legion. And door opens, hand your passport over, go in a side room, and you sort of sat there waiting, and I think somebody turned up about a minute or two behind me, and then the guy comes in, he says, hooligan. No, because a lot of them have this perception, if you're British, you're either wore a bowler hat or you're a hooligan. And that was it, sort of. Then.
How old were you then?
I was 19 then, yeah.
That must have been that sounds daunting now, mate, and just to have the balls to sort of do something like that.
I think, all that sort of the adventure of it, you sort of turn up, and I probably prefer to have gone to Paris than one of the other ones, but were sort of modern sort of ones in apartment blocks, or sort of ones that are off the street that look a bit more modern. It's sort of added to the mystique with the big earthen walls and the big huge wooden gates and sort of that mystique.
Were your family aware that that was it, you're off and you're going to do that, or did they think you'd off travelling or something? Partially,
yeah. I'd sort of said I was going travelling and sort of, left a note and sort of even indicated where I was going and what I was going to do.
Because most parents wouldn't the perception of what people would think the Legion is, sort of murderers, escaped convicts, people looking for redemption. you know, most parents wouldn't be like, oh yeah, that sounds good. I want to see you for 5 years.
Yeah, and that's, isn't it? It's that strange thing. Randomly, you had quite a lot of brothers in there as well. And you used to get quite a lot of kids that follow in their father's footsteps who joined the Legion as well. But no, it's a lot of that misconception, isn't it? And I actually got asked that when I was in the police. Have you raped or murdered anyone? Which I said, well, if I had, I wouldn't be here in the police, would I? But, you know, so
that's the way that, you know, that's the you know, whether it's the myth or not. And I'm sure maybe back in the day there was people escaping something that joined it, but that your experience is quite different to that.
I mean, they won't take anyone for drugs, murder, rape, things like that. So that sort of rules out. And if you think now what you're going to get 5 years in prison for, it's got to be pretty serious. And that sort of ties in. So sort of when you're going through the recruiting process, I spent about 4 days in Paris, and you had a brief medical, and then you all get sent down to Marseille, Aubagne, which is the Legion's headquarters, where they have what they call the selection centre. And you're there for about, could be 2 to 3 weeks, depending how long it takes you. And sort of from there.
Sorry, mate, had you prepared for, you know, you're going into some sort of basic training? Were you training like
I've done like sports and whatnot, and, you know, running that sort of thing, general bits and pieces, brushed up my schoolboy French because I failed it miserably at school. You know, I couldn't get between lat and le.
Before you go into your sort of journey of how maybe tell the sort of audience of what are the actual, you know, how the Legion started, what it is, and as a concept. And
see, it's quite random. So the French have always had foreign troops going way back. Sort of, you know, they had Irish regiment, Scottish, Polish, going back 13th century sort of thing. And then it came out in 1831 with King Louis Philippe, and what they wanted essentially was to get rid of the rabble off the streets. So they had, you know, Swiss regiments, things like that. They had a lot of foreign soldiers drunk in the streets of Paris and whatnot. They wanted to get rid of them. So they created a foreign legion, which was to unify all these different ones they previously had, round people up and ship them off to a colony and get them out of France. So they created that. Largely it was sent to Algeria to start with, to pacify and do a lot of building work, you know, clear areas, build tunnels, build roads, a bit like the Roman Legion. It was very much a building army as well. So they created that, and obviously it went on from Algeria. It then fought in Spain, where it was sort of given to the Spanish Queen, and then was reformed again after that. Indochina, Madagascar, all sort of throughout the French Empire. And it's sort of, its key history is in Mexico. So in 1863, the Europeans had sort of installed, I think it was Archduke Maximilian, a sort of puppet emperor in Mexico. And the French were one of the people backing him, and the Mexicans were fighting back against it. And there's sort of our biggest sort of celebration day is Cameroon Day. So there was a group of about 30 legionnaires led by Captain Danju. Were doing a supply convoy up to Puebla, and they got ambushed by about 2,000 Mexicans whilst they were there, and they sort of held out and fought to the death, and sort of they promised that they wouldn't surrender. And the last ones, when they ran out of ammunition, did a bayonet charge, and about 4 of them survived. And then afterwards, in the ruins of the Cameroon, this hacienda they fought in, they found the wooden hand of Captain Danju. And in the Legion, they have like the Holy Crypt, which is where they keep all the flags, and they keep the wooden hand of Captain Danju. And every year on Cameroon Day, they bring it out. And so the biggest honour you can have as an ex-legionnaire is you're chosen to carry the hand down the sacred way. So from there, obviously, it fought First World War, Second World War, Algeria, Indochina. Obviously, it almost got wiped out in Dien Bien Phu. And then obviously onto more modern times, it's a lot of insurgencies in Africa, Chad, that sort of thing. Again, UN and EU missions in Kosovo and the like, Afghanistan, Mali. So again, very active. Sort of, it's kept sort of bubbling over all through those periods of times. And again, one of the key dates is obviously the end of Algerian independence, 1961, when they rebelled against France and they were going to jump on Paris, which the first parachute regiment, they joined sort of what was the Pieds Noirs, the sort of OAS. They hinted at sort of in the Day of the Jackal, Frederick Forsyth's book, that they rebelled against that along with some other regiments in Algeria, seized the airports, and they literally were going to jump on Paris to try and overthrow it. They viewed it as the betrayal that Algeria was given independence. And that ended and obviously broke up. They disbanded some regiments. They shot some people, obviously were executed for that. And that again, sort of the famous Edith Piaf song, No Je ne regrette rien. That's what they sang as they sort of marched to get disbanded. In terms of that. And then again,
Surprised they didn't completely shut it down after that.
There was strange tales of they were going to sell it to the Americans. But one of the key things, so before that, they'd never been based in France. They weren't allowed to be based in France. They were always based overseas. And they'd been brought back to France for World War I, obviously, to fight there. And again, in the Second World War, you had a very strange history where the Legion fought the Legion. Obviously, parts of it were in Vichy, France. And they have the 13th DBLA, the Half Brigade. That was formed with Legion elements who arrived in the UK from North Africa. It was based in Liverpool and sort of put together there to go and operate in Narvik with the Brits when they went into Norway. And then, obviously, Operation Torch, when the Allies went to North Africa, you had, I think it was in Syria, where one regiment of Vichy French Legion, I think it was the 6th REI, fought the Free French Legion, fought each other in a battle. And obviously then after the Second World War, you had obviously lots of Germans. Obviously you've got, the famous books, was it Legion of the Damned? I think it was Devil's Guard. Sorry.
Devil's Guard, yeah.
Yeah, obviously you had lots
awesome
of
book.
Waffen SS, lots of German army, and it leads into that history of, again, you even had, there was a famous case of a guy who was a Jewish guy in a concentration camp, and he hunted down the guy who was in one of his guards, who was in the Legion. He joined the Legion to hunt him down and kill him in Indochina.
Well, you would have had French resistance fighters like in the Legion from the Second World War with ex-SS from the Second World War fighting alongside each other. So that must have...
And that very convoluted, because again, the French went straight from the end of the Second World War to the war in Indochina straight away. And again, the need for manpower, they went around the prisoner of war camps, obviously taking people and recruiting them. And again, that lots of people were given the choice of, prisoner of war camp, war crimes trial, or off you go. The Legion obviously disappeared their tattoos, their blood groups on their arms. And again, I think they said, something like 60-70% of it was German sort of in that period in Indochina.
What's it look like now in terms of like numbers as the Legion and the makeup? I know it's pretty multicultural.
Yeah. So you're looking at about 8,500 it is now. And again, it goes in waves. So I joined in sort of mid-90s, and it was sort of the end of the Brits. So I think after Simon Murray's book came out, there was masses of Brits. And I think they said even at one point, probably in the late 80s, it was 60% Brits. It was almost like a second British army.
Are you saying there's some Falkland vets and Argentinians in the regiment?
Yeah, so when I complete training, I went to South America. My sergeant was an Argentinian. And I had an Argentinian corporal in training who hated the Brits. It obviously singled me out straight away. But the sergeant I had, Sergeant Lopez, he absolutely loved the Brits. And he was saying how he was taken prisoner in the Falklands. And when he was in the Legion Paras, he was in the amphibious company. And some new Legionnaires had arrived from training. He recognised this guy, an English guy, and said, "I know you." And this guy said, "No, I don't think so." And that was the guy who'd taken him prisoner in the Falklands. And they were in the same platoon together.
That's crazy.
And ended up best of friends, real good friends together, sort of the random things that. But I was sort of the tail end of the Brits. There wasn't many. I mean, in Brits, you're counting that. Lots of Southern Irish, because again, I think the age limits and the ability to get in the Southern Irish Army is so limited. You then had, lots of East Europeans, because that was before the EU, getting passports. There was lots of Koreans and Japanese when I was there. Again, and then looking at extremes, we had an Eskimo in our company, and now you've got a lot of Nepalese, which sort of Nepalese and Brazilians, I think, are sort of the two biggest nationalities, and not so many sort of Brits much at all. But again, you're smattering of Americans, not many, quite a few Aussies and Kiwis. Because again, I think the Kiwis, after Rainbow Warrior incident, when the French blew up the Greenpeace ship, they get free visa-free travel to New Zealand, so you used to get random things like that. But
what's the, apart from the things you can already said, the challenge, the mystique, the redemption, or what's the what was the benefits of somebody like a British person when you were in going, what do you get?
See, it's weird because you don't obviously think of that when you join, and sort of when you're in there, to going through sort of the recruiting process, some of it seems quite strange. So apart from your fitness test, you go in and you get interviewed about your life, and you sort of, from the day you're born to the day you've turned up there, and you go and get interviewed several times about things and asked about, I think you're lying about this or about your past. And obviously, depending how complicated your background is and whatnot, depends on the severity of it. And then it was a very strange test I was never able to find anything about. You got a book of trees, and you picked out 2 trees from the book. And this was like, there was a tree with a swing on it, a tree that had been hit by lightning, and then you had to draw 2 trees, and you couldn't draw a Christmas tree or a pine tree. And I've never been able to find out anywhere what this test comes from or what it indicates. But always stuck in my mind, you got to draw 2 trees and pick 2 trees out of a book.
Yeah, that explains a lot.
And again, psychometric tests and whatnot, again, things. Do you like mixing with people at a party? Do you go to bed with the curtains drawn? Random things. And then obviously as you're going through that, you'll get called in an office and they can decide to change your identity if they want, or you can ask for it. Again, that's one of the things they do then. If you obviously choose to change it, or they choose, you get new name, new parents' name, new date of birth, new place of birth. So from that moment on, if anyone comes looking for you, you're not there. There's nobody that name serving the Legion because there's not. You're under a new identity.
Well, and that's a choice. You don't have to do that.
They can choose it for you, or if they don't, you can choose it and say, I'll have a new identity. And again, no one will know that you're serving under a false identity until you ask to change it back, because there's nothing that says in your security papers, yes, it will be there, that you're under assumed identity. And so if you were under an assumed identity, you couldn't have any contact with the outside world. You couldn't have any phone calls, any letters, nothing. That was it, sort of cut off completely. And then...
That come at the start of training? Or
so that's literally before you... So it takes about 3 weeks to join from when you get to Marseille to go through sort of your fitness tests, medical tests.
What were they like, the fitness tests?
I mean, if it's a test Cooper, they call it in French, which is you do 12 minutes round a running track and you've got to get, I think it was over 3,000 metres it was then to be sort of graded in there. And obviously, the more you do, the higher up the list you go and whatnot. I think they've changed it again now to something else, another round testing those pull-ups and rope climbing. And then a lot of it as well was you spend most of your day in the kitchen sort of washing pots and pans and whatnot, sort of to see what you volunteered for or anything like that. And that touches back to sort of what you can get after Legion. So when they call it passing rouge, they call the names out and give you the tags to obviously say you've been accepted and you're going to go on to training, and the other people get called out and basically kicked out. And you go spend one day at the Legion's Invalids Institution, which is sort of, after you've done your 5 years, if you leave with a good conduct certificate, you can volunteer to go there and spend the rest of your life there. And it's literally like a chateau in the south of France where they make wine and make ceramics. So there's sort of that aspect
not
there.
Not a bad way of life.
And you meet sort of, that's where a lot of the interesting characters there. There used to be a Luftwaffe pilot there who joined the Legion after the Second World War. There was a smattering of all sorts of different people in there. And they had 2 other places, again, in the south of France, smaller ones. But again, you'd sort of go there and work in the vineyards, picking grapes with sort of these old-timers, some of whom literally, were in wheelchairs and whatnot. It was set up after Indochina, given the number of people coming back, missing arms and legs and whatnot. But you sort of realise when you go through it, so they have a different system. It's 15 years for your pension in the Legion. So and what they do is you get points every year for the year in, points for every courses, points for every posting you go on, and that bumps up your pension, and it's like 20 years for a bigger pension. But if you leave after 8 years, you get 2 years' wages almost as a golden handshake to leave with. And they'll also fund a course, so pretty much whatever you want to do, sort of within reason.
Pretty well looked after, sound of it.
Yeah. It is, and you sort of don't realise you're leaving. Even when I was leaving, they have an office that has jobs come in, and one came in, and it was the Williams Formula One team looking for somebody to drive the truck with the cars in it and whatnot. But again, as they say to you, when you go in, before you got your regiment, you're on the Holy Crypt sort of thing, and the general comes in and gives you a talk to you and whatnot and says, no matter what happens, we promise you we'll put you back in life better than you were when you came in. Brilliant. And then even if you desert, you'll still be better than you were when you turned up at the door. So yeah, it's sort of, you don't really realise them bonus aspects until you sort of leave, that those are things there for you. And again, even now, so I mean, if I had enough, I could go and live in the Invalids Institution if you want to. And again, they have another system in France where...
That goes on for your whole lifetime. You could be out 30 years and still go...
Yeah, and even cases, lots of it sort of in France is you tend to find people maybe who've fallen in hard times or whatever, and they've got nowhere else to go and they get sent there. They've even had ones that are sent by courts there. They were either going to go to prison or get sent to the Invalids Institution.
How's that funded then? How do they manage to support that many?
The Legion's very, very weird, sort of, and it got lost. I think it's got money, obviously, gets from the French government, obviously, as its budget, but it also got money from other sources. And I think there was quite a lot of wealthy widows after the First World War, left it lots of money and things like that. And it's always sort of attracted sort of donations. It's very big on raising money internally.
I assume they're selling that wine that they're making.
Oh, they do, yeah, and it's won quite a lot of prizes as well. The wine, it's quite good wine.
Bottles up there.
Yeah, it's quite well renowned. Then they have the ceramics and whatnot in the museum, and they have a band that goes and does tours and releases various bits and pieces. And it was quite secretive. And then in COVID, they opened up quite a lot, and they sort of did quite a lot of videos. And there's a guy, Major Gerald, who's the head of sports in the Legion. He did a lot of videos on sports and sort of linking in with the French rugby union team and whatnot. But again, it's that thing of, it has a mystique to it and sort of very sort of hidden nature of what people see on the outside. And I sort of joined at a transition period. So when I joined them, you're not going to get rich off it. When I joined, it was like £150 a month was the wages. And that was sort of paid in your hat. You went and got your money, sort of put it in your hat and went out. But about a year after I joined, it was sort of, they'd reviewed the pay scales and they went up and they were doing a phase of modernisation. So you got to, Castle Naudry was for the training, sort of in the south of France, 4 months. You spent the first month on an isolated farm, where you start learning your French and you get paired up with a French speaker. So the French who join become Swiss, Monegasque, Canadian. So there's no French people officially serving apart from the officers. And again, my platoon training was quite mixed with quite a lot, again, Japanese, mixture, East Europeans, and there was another Irish guy in there. And again, I didn't get on with the guy who taught me French. We didn't really speak much. But luckily, I learned it a lot better in the Legion I did at school, because when they said, ignore Latin, look, it's a table, everyone knows it's a table, so it doesn't really matter. I could grasp that concept and actually put it together.
You're not allowed to speak English, you?
No. So again, and even when you go on sort of through your time in it, working hours, no. But then again, sort of outside of hours, it depends. And you either had a lot of the senior NCOs had been in that time when there was lots of Brits, so lots of people either hated the Brits or quite liked the Brits. So again, it was that thing of depending who you were and sort of where you were with. I mean, when I was in the Legion Paras, I had a Cockney platoon sergeant, and he'd regularly come out and say things in English. I remember we'd, in a morning parade, been out, lined up parade, and the platoon commander had issued his orders, then left, and he walked out from Ebony and said, England demands that every man does his duty, and that's all I demand of you, and walked off. And everybody else was like looking at me going, what's going on? What's he said? So yeah, you'd have that strange thing again of languages and whatnot. And again, one of the biggest things, the challenges you find in the Legion is ironing. They love ironing. So literally, thing, our parade shirts had 15 creases. So you had 3 down each chest there, 3.5 centimetres apart, 2 down each sleeve, 5 centimetres apart, 2 across the back, 5 centimetres apart, 3 down the back, 5 centimetres apart. So literally, it's like when you were on guard in parade uniform, you didn't sleep before it because you'd have uniform inspections every hour, and your bits and pieces were measured sort of certain distances, and so it was ironing sort of. It's how to occupy people, and there's not much to do because again, your free time was sort of limited. So when you finish training, you sort of, depending where you come, you can sort of pick regiments or you get allocated them based on need. And I quite fancy going to South America, sort of seen the film Papillon, Amazon jungle and whatnot. And that wasn't a popular choice because full of malaria, spend all your time in the jungle. You didn't get a boost to wages with it being an overseas territory.
French Guiana was the base, isn't it?
That's it, yeah. And there's the European space station there with the rocket.
Right, in French Guiana?
Yeah, so they just had one of the rockets blow up, Ariane 5, I think it was, blown up on launch. So that was there. So when I went in front of the commandant and sort of said, where do you want to go? And I said, French Guiana. He looked at me and went, English? He went, rocks in the head. Yeah, he said, off you go. So spent about 2 or 3 weeks in Marseille waiting for the detachment to sort of form up, because you get people, there's about 9 regiments in the Legion. So you've got 2 HQ, the HQ1, a training regiment. You've got 2 infantry. One of them's based over, at that time you had 1 in Djibouti, 1 in French Guiana and 1 in mainland France, an engineer regiment, a parachute regiment, a cavalry regiment. And then there was 1 in Tahiti near the nuclear testing site based out there. And you can move around, a bit like the Marines, it's like more of a corps. You can move around, so you'll get people going from the cavalry to the paras, all around different regiments. And to get the overseas regiments, they were 2-year postings. So you'd go over for 2 years and then come back and go to a different regiment. So So our detachment formed up, then obviously flew over to French Guiana. And that was, again, sort of, it was one of the forgotten regiments because literally it wasn't operational. You know, there wasn't conflict round there. So the equipment was all 1950s and 60s from Algeria. And, you know, we had PP-11 radios, the American ones from World War II and that sort of thing. I remember we had the BLU signals radios and a guy had to pedal them whilst they did the Morse code and whatnot and things like that. So it was really all the old kit. And it was a time of sort of transit. We got there and they were just closing down the last French military brothel, which was on camp, and that was sort of the last one ever in sort of all the French army, what they called a Bordel Militaire de Campagne, but we called the Pouf. And that was sort of the last one closing, which was sort of the end of that era of modernisation, sort of bringing things more into line.
Right, Chris, let's take you back a little bit to the beginning, mate. You know, so you're on the run. You rock up to France, you know, the big sort of brown doors. Will you tell us a bit about what your journey through training was, the intensity, you know, all the bits that come with that? And I said, you know, the King's Badgeman in my troop in training was ex-Legionnaire, you know, and he was at a different level to the training team, to the Marine Corporals. His description of the intensity was, you know, it was very extreme, but in not in a coordinated fashion, but mixed in with learning a complete new everything done in a new language as well.
So yeah, you sort of pass red, what they call it. You get your red tab, which means you've passed selection. You're going to go to Castle Naudry for training, and a sergeant and a corporal come and pick you up and take you to Castle Naudry, and it's a 4-month basic training. It's not as specialised as sort of the Brits, because again, with it being sort of a corps, once you finish that first training, you're then going to go and do your training, whether you're a cavalryman, an engineer, or infantry, whatever you're going to do. So it's quite rudimentary and basic, and again, a lot of learning the language. So you spend your first month out on what they call a farm, which is sort of like an isolated sort of barn building, sort of in the countryside, where you learn the basics sort of, again, of marching. Singing's a big one again. The Legion loves singing. You have a songbook with, like, you've got platoon songs, company songs, regiment songs, ones with whistling, you know, ones in French, ones in English, ones in Russian, so German, all sorts of ones. And again, it's a lot of learning that basics of it. So again, it's, you know, I wouldn't say bullying. Yes, again, you know, you're getting a thick ear, a kick the backside, because again, you've got so many different nationalities of teaching somebody how not to do something. Sometimes it's easier, you know, to give somebody a smack around the head, or duck marching. March canard was the big we used to have, where you sort of waddle, squatted down with your hands on your head, which was one that we used to do a lot of.
How many of you in the, like, is it in the troop at that
point?
So
13 a platoon, and you what they call a section. You're not a Legionnaire then for your first month.
You all accommodate together? Yeah,
you all live. You sort of split again into groups of about 3 in a platoon, and again you sort of live in cot beds with the 2 corporals. Then again, there's not much sleep in your first month. Pretty much, you're running non-stop because the Legion loves running. Sort of, and I was never sort of a speed machine, so you're always out, you know, running, learning bits and pieces. You know, the very, very first month is not so much soldiering, it's the very basics of sort of getting you together as a cohesive group and teaching you some learning words and actually, you know, sort of physical fitness, the very, very basics of it. And again, the challenge of that, so you didn't get fed a lot. I mean, literally in basic training, again, meals would be like a certain amount of minutes, and it was all chucked in the bins, and they put bleach in the bins so you couldn't go and eat out the bins, because people used to go and eat out the bins. And you'd before you had your meal, you know, they do, every sort of regiment has sort of a refrain, an introduction, and a sort of chant, and they do a bit of that. And then you'd sort of learn your verbs. So again, like the verb avoir, stand up, repeat it, and dunk your head in a bucket of water if you kept getting it wrong. So for me, I wasn't too bad, because once I didn't have to learn Lat and Le, and it was all the same. I wasn't that bad. So the better you were, the less you got called up to do sort of repeat things and verbs. And you always have, I remember particularly if the 2 Japanese guys we had, they'd say something and say repeat. They'd stand up and say repeat. And that was it. And so they'd try and have the sergeant getting irate saying, I want you to repeat the verb avoir, not repeat. And they just don't go repeat.
And they're speaking to you in French?
Non-stop. So non-stop, everything in French.
So at the start, you haven't got a clue what's going on?
Nothing whatsoever. Again, it's literally, I sort of racked my brains from a bit of schoolboy French that I still had, but you obviously got people who speak none of it, literally. And again, you look at like Japanese, Koreans and Chinese, and again, Arabic legionnaires who've come with. It's not even the same alphabet, so you've got nothing even you can look at and share.
Are you like signed in now, French citizen? I mean, as you if you left now, you deserters. Are you in?
So once you finish the end of your first month, you do what they call a marche Kepi Blanc, and you go and do a march. And we did ours in the Pyrenees for 3 days. The end of that, you get your white kepi, and you then become a legionnaire. So again, it sort of has a lot of Germanic traditions, so you tend to have it either be like at night time in a forest around a campfire, or certain different settings they have it in different things, and you get your kepi and then go back to your regiment, and that's to Castle Laundry and do like next 3 months of training, which is more very basic soldiering, weapon craft, sort of uniform, ironing. Ironing's the biggest one, sort of getting you into that. Again, assault courses, that sort of thing. So again, it is intense in terms of the challenge of learning the language, because again, understanding what's been told to you, what you've got to do, where you've got to go, how you've got to do it. And again, the Legion has sort of lots of old sort of unique sort of quirks and traditions, like your lockers were all laid out in a very certain fashion. You had to have a white blanket wrapped over like a shoebox with your kepi on top of it, and then epaulets laid certain sides of it.
And Marines got a similar thing.
Yeah.
Kind of.
So again, lots of things like that, locker inspections, that sort of thing. And again, lots of physical training, lots of weapons craft, and it's sort of eased off the intensity as you sort of get further along it. And again, a lot of that depends who you were and sort of, how much you adapted to it. And then you get towards the end of your training and you go again and do sort of another big march, and again, weapons tests and various things that sort of then determines where you'll finish in your training. And again, they have another strange system that when you get to it, they have a thing called the foot. So the person who finished top in training, if they want to, can stay behind, and they'll sort of become one of the trainers on the next training cycle. So it was weird. You'd have some of the corporals had come from other regiments, so cavalry, engineers, paras, whatever. Some would be from the training regiment, and you have this thing called a foot who just finished training, would stay there and go through for their 2 years in the training regiment.
Do you have many that were, I think you mentioned before, there was ex-paras and stuff. Were there many former military in your recruit sort of troop going through, or platoon?
Lots of sort of Europeans, yeah, because a lot of them were conscripts.
So some of them had some background
and
already.
you had a mixture. You'd have some of the French guys that had been in the French military were there. And again, quite a big mixture. You've got people of all sorts of backgrounds. Again, there was only one other Irish guy with me, sort of from our sort of language bracket. And then once you've finished your training, we went and did our car driving course at the end of it, which was in the Citroen C2s with the gear stick in the dashboard.
Oh, no.
And I remember doing that, and of course driving the opposite side of the road. Yeah. So I'm there getting taught, and the guy, the instructor, just punching me in the head, going opposite side, opposite side, opposite side.
Yeah, constantly. And you're saying when even when you've passed out your training, you still have to wear your uniform at all times. Like,
yeah,
you can't go out.
No civilian clothes for the first 5 years. And again, it's very strict. No girlfriends, nothing like that. Right. You're not allowed a relationship. Again, no mobile phones, no.
So
like
extreme,
that.
Hence why they have the brothel on camp.
Which was part of that. Well, if you think it's quite a smart move, so everything you earned, they got back off you eventually, and then it all back. But so you'd finish training and you'd go back to Oban, which was the Legion headquarters, and then you'd get assigned your regiment. So you might get a choice, you might not, depending what regiments had what needs. And again, sort of you then go from there, get to your regiment, and then once you arrive in your regiment, you do then you sort of training for whatever arms you'd gone to. So again, if you got the infantry, you'd do a couple of weeks of sort of infantry using, the infantry weapons, tactics and whatnot. So it was quite probably different for people who've been in the British military and whatnot, in the fact that the basic training was more about being a soldier, being a legionnaire, lots of singing, because the Legion loves singing non-stop. You've got songs around the campfire, marching songs, you've got songs of whistling in it, platoon songs, company songs, regiment songs. And when I then went to Legion Paras, you've got the anthem of the Legion Paras is The Devil Marches With Us, which is the Waffen SS marching song. Which you might, if you've seen the film Fury, when the SS are marching along singing it, that was ours adapted to that. And that
explains your great singing voice.
That's it. And then our company song was Heiter wollen wir spravieren. It's a German SS song about going dancing randomly. And again, that has lots of whistling. So not just singing, you've got to whistle on certain footsteps and whatnot as you're going along. So you get to your regiment, and then once you're in your regiment after about 6 months, you'll then get moved down a path of your speciality, what you're going to go in. So you might want to go and be a medic, a signaller, a sniper, you know, and then, you know, a bricklayer, a plumber, everything's contained in a house, a cook and whatnot. So you sort of then get moved down your branch of what you're going to do.
Is that a choice or is that whatever you picked?
Again, it depends. So I went to South America my first 2 years and then went to the Legion Paras. And in the Legion Paras, everyone did a Morse test to find out if you were good at Morse. Then if you were good at Morse, you went to the Signalers course. Where other ones were sort of down to your sort of choice or sort of what you were sort of skilled in. So in South America, our platoon medic was a doctor from Romania. So quite clearly he went straight in his medics course and sort of whatnot. So again, it would depend on sort of what sort of skills you had. And again, like if you wanted to be a mechanic, obviously you had to have a decent level of French to go and do it. I did a bugler's course, which was the course you're guaranteed to get jailed on because you played a bugle about 20 times a day. They literally have, you know, wake up, roll calls, changing the guard, and literally you'd have a revolving door in prison of buglers because literally Monday morning regimental assembly, where you play for the colonel and whatnot, quite often they'd be there, the flag would be going up, you'd hear something going, the colonel would be like, stop, he's got 28 already, just march him off. And you'd see him bring out buglers from jail to play because no one was left out of jail. So yeah, it's that strange thing because you've got quite a lot of specialities you can go into sort of and people can move across them. So again, it's sort of quite in-house and contained.
How was your French by this point?
Mine was quite good at the end of training. You've got to have like 500 words basic vocabulary, but mine wasn't too bad. And sort of once you've sort of come back from the farm and you're in training, you sort of then you can go like the odd trip to what their version of the NAFI they call the foyer. You'd get French films you'd watch, you know, you'd put movies on at a weekend, you'd watch it.
Did you go out much? Did you get to socialise much or not really?
We had the end of Kepi Blanc March, we went for a meal and we had a Greek sergeant. So we'd gone for a meal in this restaurant and one of the other sergeants obviously smashed his plate on the floor, thinking it wasn't a Greek restaurant. And everybody else followed suit thinking that was a done thing and it upset the Greek sergeant. But you had that one brief trip out and then you had one other, what they call Quartier Libre, which was out into Toulouse. You could go out, once you finished training, you obviously got more free time. But
was it quite a social aspect? Like, you know, from our time in the Marines, probably changed a bit now, but it was pretty social. You know.
When you got to your regiments, yeah, so when you got to your regiments, obviously, as a young legionnaire, you wouldn't get much because for about the first 2 or 3 months, you got all the crap jobs going, you'd be like scrubbing the block and you still had regular group punishments. So if somebody had mucked up, you'd all be like as legionnaires scrubbing the block until like midnight, 1 a.m, depending. And it's like everything, you know, however you fit in and do your job, you get left alone more if you sort of, you know, and the Legion used to get some spectacular people who would do some absolute disasters.
Yeah, I bet.
But you used to have, each company had a bar and then you had a regimental one.
So you stayed basically on the camps more than going out?
Yeah, South America, we used to go out quite a lot downtown, obviously. It was
what was the perception like? Because it's not like, you know, I suppose every military, anywhere there's a military garrison or camp, the guys and girls stand out because they probably all look similar, but you're literally going out in your uniform.
Yeah, it's quite weird to South America, Kourou, the town, there was the European Space Station was there. So we had a mixture of people who worked at the space station and again, lots of Brazilians who sort of moved across that way into French Guiana. So again, lots of the locals sort of, most of them don't really, you know, like garrison towns, but you're not sort of that popular. But in terms of bars, a guy from Hong Kong, Stanley, ran a bar, and that was the sort of one most of us used to go to, the Colibri, and he'd give you credit for your watches as well. Sort of, if you ran out of money, he'd take your watches as credit and hold them. But again, you go out and it was obviously lots of Brazilian girls and whatnot, so people used to love going out down there, go down the beach.
What are you saying about the kepi? You'd all take them off in a bar?
So you go in a bar, and then most of the bars would have a shelf at the top, and you put your kepi there. The problem was, if you were the last one to leave, you'd find somebody taking yours, and you'd either have one left with a big stain on it, or it didn't fit anymore. So you had like one that was 5 sizes too small. And because you're obviously in uniform, and to get your ID card to go out, you go down, pass in front of the duty sergeant who inspects you, say yes. Then you'd go to the guard commander, guard sergeant, and book out. And depending who they were, some might obviously, you know, check up. And I remember there was an Hungarian sergeant and he used to have Jane's identification guide and you had to identify 2 vehicles or something before you could go out.
Yeah,
and he'd pick out some random sort of rocket system from Hungary and go, and what's this?
Oh, God.
Yeah, it's the same game as you play. French Guiana, so you were based there, was you?
Yeah.
That's obviously my favourite film is Papillon in French Guiana. That prison wasn't where you end up having a base, was it?
No, so the prisons from the film are on the islands. There's 3 islands offshore called the Islands of Salvation. When the first French settlers went there, obviously there was malaria and everything else, and to get back, they moved to these 3 islands and stayed there. And there was Devil's Island, Royal Island, St. Joseph's Island.
Yeah.
And the one with the cells where he gets the sunlight taken away and locked in for 5 years, that's the Legion's Rest Centre, St. Joseph Island.
Oh, okay.
So when you come back from doing your month in the jungle, sort of, you go out with the call Mission Profonds, and there's stones on the border of Brazil, and you go head down to where these stones are, cut the grass around it, get a picture, be like 30 days cutting your way through the jungle. You go to the St. Joseph's Island, and in there you can see what's left of the old cell blocks where they used to keep them and take away the sunlight and board them off. Oh. Royal Island's got the big main prison on it and the museum, and obviously then you can see Devil's Island, but no one's allowed across there, sort of that's off limits.
Yeah, Devil's Island was the last one, the unescapable one or whatever.
And they've still got sort of, when you go out to the east of French Guiana, on the border with Suriname, there's still one of the old prisons there as well, because there are quite a few of them in the different sort of prison camps and penal camps, because I think they only closed them in like 56, 57 was the last ones finished.
It's very much like the Legion is very much like almost like a private military, really, isn't it? Where where there's a big explosion of private military since 2000. America use it as not a deniable thing. So, but it keeps the deaths of American servicemen away from the public. When they're using private, because they use private military for state activities. It's kind of like France is doing the same thing, really.
Very similar, because the French army was mainly conscript and it couldn't go abroad without a vote of parliament. So we'd be on standby sort of 24 hours notice of springboks. The French was weird. Their army had like 3 systems. You had purely conscript regiments that didn't go anywhere. And they even had things called adapted military service, which was people got sent to learn French and do maths, who literally couldn't be trusted to have a weapon. They'd get sent there. Then you had some professional units, and then they do their conscription of either 10 months, or they could volunteer for 2 years and go to overseas regiments like French Marine units. Because the French have commando Marines, which are similar to Royal Marines, and they wear their beret on the same side as the Brits. And then Marines, which are more like naval infantry, but not specialised. So there was only very few units could go abroad on rapid notice. So generally it used to be the Legion, because again, at those times, it didn't create a ripple in France if Legionnaires died. No one was particularly worried. I remember on Christmas 1999, so Christmas used to be a big thing in the Legion, massive. Every platoon would build a bar, and every platoon had to build a nativity scene involving the baby Jesus, the Foreign Legion, and they'd get judged on sort of Christmas Day. And people put loads of effort in. It was like literally masses of things being done for it. And Christmas morning, you'd stay in bed, and the senior NCOs would come and serve you what they call boudin, blood sausage and wine in bed, and the youngest Legionnaire would write the duties for the day. And Christmas Eve, you had a big meal, and you did sketches, comedy sketches and whatnot, and you got presents. But it's Christmas 1999, and we're in the middle of our meal, and a runner came in and went, "There's an alert, you're all going to the Ivory Coast." And everyone thought it was a joke, so like chucking bread rolls at him, like, "Yeah, nice one," and whatnot. And he's like, "No, this is real, it's alert, everybody's got the Ivory Coast alert, Christmas is cancelled." So that was literally, and everybody's like half drunk at this time, having to go back, pack your bags, because literally you're going out Christmas morning.
Oh, man.
So literally everybody's like hanging, sort of pack bags, get kit ready rapidly and whatnot. So yeah, it was always on springboard alert, because the French army generally, they had sort of a very small professional corps with a few regiments, but again, they would sort of be deployed as backup, and again, all their special forces units. Because again, it was weird, after the coup in Algeria, they did a strange system. They didn't trust the French army not to rebel again. So their special forces were split between different regiments. So ours was called the Crap, which isn't the best name for your special forces, which was the Commando Recherche and Action Profondeur Deep Penetration Commanders, but the Craps. They changed it after that to the GCP, because
that's a bit better.
No one wants to say, "What's your special forces called?" The Craps.
The Craps. Brilliant.
So are they, is it still in Francophone African countries, is it still French Foreign Legion bases?
There is. I mean, a lot less now, because obviously like Mali's gone, Burkina Faso's gone. I think they've probably got Gabon left. And
you just see him Djibouti, don't you?
Djibouti's a big one, isn't it?
Djibouti was, and they pulled out of Djibouti and moved to Abu Dhabi.
Right. Okay.
the 13th DBLE, and then they moved now back to mainland France. But yeah, they still in Gabon, probably they're leaving Senegal as well. So there's not many left. But yeah, when I was in, it was mainly Chad, Ivory Coast, Gabon.
Where did you end up during your time?
So I did Gabon, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, sort of also the West Africa sort of side of it. Didn't go to the East Africa side. My company was going to Djibouti just when I was leaving. But yeah, the thing was they had a lot of sunshine trips as well. So you might get New Caledonia in the Pacific was sort of some of the better ones they had, or Guadeloupe, Martinique. So you sort of had a mixture of places you could end up.
So what made you bring your time to an end at the
So
Legion?
I was coming towards the end of my time, and I was never the best Legionnaire, sort of never the worst, and you couldn't really be the worst because there were some people who just made spectacular careers out of being absolutely the worst possible thing going. I mean, like you said, the worst thing you can do in the Legion is fail, and that's what they said. So, if you're going to desert, don't get caught. We had guys caught at the barbed wire, couldn't even get out of camp, like the barbed wire fencing and whatnot. And we were in Kosovo, and we ended up going out as a riot support unit, and we'd done training with the French riot police, and we were in Mitrovica, and there was a couple of guys from the RUC who were attached to us. So I was sort of doing a lot of translating with them in our section, going out with them. Even though we had in our company, there was sort of me, a couple of the Brits, there was a couple of Kiwis, and I thought, I quite fancy that. And I looked on, saw my local police force Humberside was recruiting, so I put in my application there to join the police. That will bring me, because weirdly, when you leave the Legion, they call it the ceremony of liberation. So it's a bit like prison, the ceremony of freedom. And again, you all go back to Oban, get processed. If you haven't got your identity back by then, you can get your identity back, change like your paperwork, like get a civilian driving license. People get processed for their pensions. And again, they ask you, like, even that day, do you want to stay in? Again, that thing. But it's weird. So the Legion, you can get jail for almost anything. You can get jail for not being in high spirits.
Oh,
you can get jail for losing the confidence of your platoon commander.
So the morale thieves just get jailed.
7 days in jail for not being in high spirits.
Oh, mate, that's good drills.
So got the end of my time there, went there, obviously. And it's weird because when you're leaving, because we were based in Corsica in the Legion Paras, so we get the ferry back to the mainland. And the Legion Paras is sort of a bit more discipline or sort of ball-breaking discipline in the regiment. So we used to have roll call 3 times a day, every day, like 10 at night as well, which the other regiments don't, even on the weekend. And when you're leaving, they have like what the security office was called, the B2, and they keep a dossier on you as well of what they think you've been up to. So if they think you were like smoking drugs or whatever it was, things have been there. So you head back, and obviously there was only 2 of us leaving from our detachment, me and a Hungarian guy I joined with. So we were, so normally if there was a senior NCO, they'd have the sensitive paperwork, so you didn't get to look at it. But sort of we got to peek into ours and whatnot, and then randomly out to leave, you're doing like your leaving thing, going around the various bits and getting stamped out. And I went to get my passport wasn't there. So literally they were like, there's an empty envelope if you haven't got a passport. And I couldn't say, that's all right, because I've got another passport in my pocket. Like, what am I going to do? Yeah. I haven't got a passport, because you're not supposed to leave France, but we all used to go and leave. And you'd normally either, one of the senior NCOs as a Brit would manage all the passports and look after them, and you had to write down. So
you could go home, and you went home at different times?
Well, so when you've been in 3 years, you can get what they call rectified, which is declare your identity. So if you're under a false identity, you get their identity back. Or if not, you just get confirmed as who you are. At that point, you could ask to go home and leave, but it's a whole rigmarole. So you didn't bother. You all put down some hotel in France you were staying at that most of you weren't. Because, I mean, at one point, half my company went to Thailand on leave. What would happen generally was your platoon commander would say, in this envelope, right, where you are going to be and a phone number, that if all goes wrong, we can reach you and ring you up. And so I remember getting one time the ferry, sort of, and that was after South America. I didn't have a passport, so we were getting the ferry across, just showing our ID cards coming across. And the customs weren't really that surprised. They weren't sort of fazed by it. And I remember flying from Nice. So we'd go, coming on leave from Corsica. And it's crazy because when you're on travel agent Calvis, if they want us to know where you're going, they just wait to the travel agent. And we're at Nice airport, and it used to be the stewards at Air France were the worst. They'd ring up the military police and say there were people getting a flight out of France. And most times you'd have your civvy clothes and you'd get changed into them. And people sat at Nice airport, literally in various civvies, And again, the military police turned up looking for people and pulled about 3 people and took them back. Again, it was sort of not managed to hide. But another time, we were going out and we were actually in full uniform, flying from Nice to Manchester. I think it was Nice to Manchester in full uniform and sort of getting pictures with tourists. Customs again, they Baton Island. Yeah. It was literally like when we arrived there and was at, on the train to Hull, sort of people were sort of looking like, who's this two blokes? Yeah. And getting stopped by British Transport Police, like, who are you and what are you doing? Yeah. So the leaving of it, do your paperwork, sort of, didn't have my passport, but I had another one by then, so I wasn't too bothered. And eventually got sort of sent what was a piece of my passport that was found. Our company admin clerk, what wasn't sort of a fan of various people, and he sort of shredded lots of people's paperwork and passports.
Good bloke.
Do you look back on it fondly?
I think it's like everything. You remember the good parts when you've left and not sort of the bad parts. I mean, like scrubbing toilets till 2 a.m, and whatnot. And again, you'd have, depending on who your sergeants were, sort of the tempo of what things happened. And I remember when you go on 24-hour guard, some sergeants were quite relaxed and sort of, you couldn't sit down until you had colonel's inspection because you're in parade uniform, and the colonel would come around like, how long you been in, what do you want to do, is he a good legionnaire, is he, whatnot. And again, it depended sort of where you were. And after the colonel's inspection was done, some of them you might be able to sit down and whatnot. Others would have you like removing aircon units off the wall and cleaning them because no one was allowed to relax. And there was a lot of that thing of depending what your platoon was like as to how much sort of free time, downtime you got and sort of what you could do.
Do you think it's still like that now? Like the level of discipline?
I think part of it, yeah.
It's like recruit training. You're like, you get messed about, but you tend to, obviously from our experience, it's not quite, once you've passed out, you treat it a bit differently, but it sounds like you're still, in the Legion, they're pretty hard on you all the way through.
And it's sort of, we get used to it because it's the way of life sort of thing. And again, it's to say the Legion Paras was much more where you had the roll course 3 times. The other regiments didn't. So when I was in South America, if you weren't working on a weekend, like in the cookhouse, washing pans and whatnot, and you hadn't got punished for something you'd done wrong, you could go out and do what you wanted. And then like even the regiments were straight at the cavalry. They used to put like phone cards in their epaulets. They had another cover on top of their kepi, so even more like quirks and things. But I think they've kept a lot of the traditions. Again, they've sort of, you've got permission to have mobile phones and things like that. And again, restrictions on girlfriends. I mean, if you wanted to get married, you got to have like 10 years service and they'd interview your wife to make sure she was suitable. Because again,
old school.
Again, of sort of that sort of thing. And
imagine saying that to your missus,
the colonel said, no, can't get married. Colonel said, you're not suitable.
That's such a get out clause, isn't it? Sorry, this is Colonel. It's not me. It's just Colonel.
You wouldn't be like, obviously you wouldn't be the man you are now if you wouldn't, and you probably wouldn't be doing, I know you went into police after, but you wouldn't be doing the job you're doing now for us. You obviously run a large project for us where you're French, you're African experience. We out of 2,000 people, you were the top of the sheet for us to pick. Like without that, maybe you wouldn't be doing what you're doing now.
I think it's massive, because I think for me it taught me to be adaptable. You learn to be sort of manage any situation sort of you come into and sort of adapt and flex to things. For me was a big part of it. It's that thing. And that's sort of one thing, I remember that, and as cheesy as it is, the general says to you when you're leaving, he said, you're better than you were when you came in and you can do anything if you put your mind to it and achieve it. So for me, it was, and it sort of put me partially down that academic route, that of doing courses and training and sort of, being adaptable and sort of looking for things. So I came out and then decided to join the police for another bit of a career change sort of and look at that side of sort of.
It must be some culture shock, mate, going from the Legion to the police.
It was, and so when I finally got in the police, because when I was doing the process of joining, they wanted some medical records from the Legion, and I said, "Oh, do you want me to write the letter?" And they're like, "No, we'll write the letter and send it." And then they said, "We've had nothing back," and so I got in touch with the Legion. They're like, "We don't understand these letters. We haven't a clue what they actually mean." They said, "We've got plenty of people who speak English who can respond to a letter in English." So eventually I said, "Right, I'll write you a letter in English and French, you can send it." So when I got in, and I was an oddity. There is a few of the Legionnaires who are in the police, mainly I think there's a couple in the Met and sort of in Essex and whatnot. But went away and did our training in Durham, and there was sort of like Humberside, a lot of the Yorkshire forces, Midlands and Northumbria. And it was still that sort of semi-structured military environment, but you had to teach yourself to march. So they'd look at somebody who was ex-military from each group to teach theirs to march, and they went to me, "Oh, you can teach your group to march." And I said, yeah, but that's French marching. We want it completely different. Yeah. Ours is like quite slow and sort of, you know,
start whistling, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant.
Any, obviously I know Jean-Claude Van Damme and Tom Hardy were in the Legion from the films, but any famous Legionnaires that out there? You know, that
you had obviously Cole Porter, the American singer.
Right.
He was a famous Legionnaire. There was one of the Tour de France winners, going back, the Luxembourg guy, was in there. Tom Hardy, obviously, from his film, which was based on Simon Murray partially.
Right.
Called Deserter, but Simon Murray never deserted, but they sort of, I think it was adapted it and based a bit off of it.
When did that come out?
I think that was randomly. I think it might have been the mid-2000s, sort of before he got massively famous, one of his early films, but it's a bit weird, partially based on it, but partially not. But yeah, it's not sort of well known.
There's a Gene Hackman film as well.
Famous one, yeah. March or Die, yeah. The massive one. That was sort of one of the biggest ones based on the World War One.
Yeah, that's a good film, man.
It is, yeah, that one, yeah. Very, very good one, yeah. Sort of at the end of the First World War and coming back and sort of then fighting obviously in Algeria and whatnot. Again, sort of on the other side, there was a guy, I can't remember his name now, but he was a writer for The Guardian and he'd done a murder and went on the run, joined the Legion, sort of got in.
Right.
And then obviously it all came out and he sort of had to leave. But again, it's sort of...
When he writes for The Guardian?
Yeah, he's a writer sort of for The Guardian. Same as Christian Jennings, who deserted. He writes for The Telegraph. He's one of their foreign correspondents. There's sort of a mixture of sort of people. Again, I think there's quite a few celebrities or people.
They have a lot of deserters in the Legion because it is so harsh.
It's more sort of not so much harsh. You get people who drop an absolute ball and their option then is to desert because they've literally spectacularly dropped one. You tend to get people who, you know, join it wasn't for them. Don't like it because again, a lot of it you've got once you adapt to that system, the French system of you've not really got a life outside the Legion. You can't go anywhere, can't defend. You sort of live with it, and again, you'll get people who sort of get homesick, meet a girl, decide, you know, and randomly have people like deserting Guiana, French Guiana and whatnot, which is like not a place you want to desert and end up stuck there. Again, you'd have people go and leave, or get particularly. Some of these European countries, like Polish, they weren't allowed to be in a foreign army. So if they went home and leave and got picked up, they get sent to prison. The same with the Swiss, things like that.
I was going to ask you about that. What is the countries that you are leaving? What do they think about the French Foreign Legion? What does Britain think about people joining?
Britain has a random thing called the 1871 Foreign Recruitment Act, so they can't give you any information about joining the Legion in Britain because of this obscure Victorian law.
Okay,
but not something like. Legion regiments are twin with British regiments now, like two reps sort of twin with two para. The Legion Infantry was twin with the Devon and Dorsets. The one of the Legion Cavalry is twin with the British Cavalry. They do a lot of exchanges together now, lots and lots sort of mixed in, and they've got close links with the Spanish Legion. A lot more integrated now because it's obviously...
Yeah, because there's British Army guys that have been seconded to the Legion, officers and...
Yeah, and again, it's a lot more mixed in. It's sort of not that reputation so much anymore. I think as obviously with the Balkans sort of in the 90s, isn't it? Got a lot more mixture of various European armies working together. It's sort of got a lot more better sort of relation. I know I always remember watching, there was a documentary on the Paras in the 90s, I think it was early, about P Company and whatnot. It was about how there was a steady stream sort of lads who'd been in Colchester, then went to the Legion, let us, you know, going backwards and forwards and whatnot. But I think now it's sort of a lot more professional view. As I say, I went through that cycle of modernisation and then they were modernising a lot more when I left. You know, like satellite technology and all the rest of it, drones, everything else, they're a lot more sort of, like most armies now, they've moved a lot more with the times and gone so much where, you know, we used to favour bayonet charges a lot. That was always sort of one of our things.
That's proper old school.
A bit like, you know, there's the famous thing of the charge of the Light Brigade. You know, when they were doing it, there was a French officer watching who turned to the British ones and said, "C'est magnifique, Mr. Palaga. It's magnificent, but it's not war." You know, and the Legion had that mystique of, you know, dying battles and, you know, glorious charges to the death and whatnot. And he cultivated the image a bit of, you know, this monastic order and sort of, you know, hidden cultures. And it was always that Legionnaires were there to die in battle and whatnot. And again, you go in, that Holy Crypt, there's a big wall with all the names on it of the officers because they never recorded the names of Legionnaires and that sort of thing.
Did you go back?
So I've only been back once. Where I've been a couple of times to the British Association Legionnaires, sort of have a meet up every year on Cameroon Day in London and sort of have a do, and they have a ceremony at the statue of Marshal Foch opposite Victoria Station in London.
Oh, awesome.
Which gets a few weird looks.
When's that?
Closest sort of weekend to the 30th of April. And sometimes they get a bugler comes from the Legion, and sometimes they've had one from the Brigade of Guards. Different
Not asking
things.
you to pick up the bugle again then?
No, not me. No, they'd be severely disappointed if I had to sort of blow a few tunes out of it.
Have you got a bugle?
No, I sold mine.
Maybe blatantly buying one of them for the office.
Bugle coming your way.
So now I still in contact with a lot of the guys I was sort of in with. I've still got friends who are in now, sort of coming up to, you know, their 30-year points. And again, you sort of, it was you get some guys, unfortunately, to see who were sort of what they call an Apsaville, who could never leave. They couldn't adjust to the outsider world. Because again, it's very enclosed, and they would leave and go straight into the Legion retirement home, the Invalids Institute. And that was, you know, people didn't really want to come out. They didn't really want to engage with the outside world anymore.
Have you been back to France many times since you left?
Yeah, I've been back a couple of times with Toulouse, because I'm linked in with Toulouse Olympic Rugby Club. So I've gone back a couple of times. I've not been back to Calvi since. I'd like to go back to Calvi and sort of see my old regiment. Now, I met them when I was in the police. They were coming over to Catterick to do some phibio training. So I went up to Catterick to see them up there, and sort of met them up that. And sort of, you know, they run about, they were going to do, they've done some exchange down in Colchester with the Brit Paras and done the jumps there, and then they were up in Catterick. So I spent 2 nights there with them, sort of went back on parade in the morning and whatnot, and linked back up with them then. But yeah, I'm still see quite a few of the lads I was in with, sort of my close friends. Some of them moved in quite similar circles, sort of in the security industry. Some lads left and sort of never touched it again. You know, some went into, like, one lad, Dutch lawyer. You've got other lads, you know, went completely, one lad became a priest. You've got other lads sort of literally now went completely, you know, into civilian life and never sort of emerged again. And most people probably never even know they were in it.
We've you know, we've had a lot of Legionnaires on the course over the years, and we've used different guys for different tasks outside consultancy jobs. But everyone pretty much has always seemed top of the game. Obviously, a lot of them are in mining or the oil and gas sector, but they all seem to be smashing it. The ones on the course, obviously, you know, they all seem highly confident, and you know, and yeah, they're always like one of the top students on the course.
I think it's one of the challenges. I think it's once you've learned to do something in another language, it sort of gives you that thing of, well, I can do pretty much anything, and it's that challenge, isn't it, to sort of be yourself. But I think that's part of what's changing the security industry now. And it's got a lot more professionalised, and you've got to have qualifications. Gone are the days when it was just based on what regiment you were in and what rank you had. But yeah, I think, there's a lot of people, like, it's the resilience part of it. I think because it is still quite rustic and quite, you know, relying on yourself to do things, and you've got to square yourself away and sort of, you know, be on top of, you know, your admin and your manager yourselves. It tends to lend itself to that. And I think for me, certainly, it led me into that side of the security industry, sort of having then left the police and then went, obviously, Iraq had just started then and whatnot, and into that industry. And then what I saw then, that professionalisation, I think security moved out of that thing where even whether it was in the UK or overseas, it was just people who were ex-military or ex-police employed because they were a certain background. That then it was, like any industry, you got to have qualifications, you got to, you know, prove your competence and that sort of thing. And I think from there it's continued to grow a lot. But even the Legion itself put a lot into getting people qualified in certain things, and again, pushing towards recognition of qualifications. And I think that was the thing when you sort of specialised as you moved up through your career, it sort of put that chance into you to sort of do qualifications and see that you could sort of achieve sort of things and move on.
Yeah, you're pretty unique in that sense. There's plenty of people out there with qualifications, but your level of experience and the amount of, you know, education you've gone down, and your policing background with the Legion, you're obviously French speaking, you've been in the security and risk game for a long time now. That's you're a pretty unique individual in that sense.
I think that it comes down, isn't it? In security, you are your own product. You're selling yourself, and you've got to have that credibility of qualifications behind you now. Because I think I saw it particularly. I went to Iraq and sort of I probably got in at quite the early days of Iraq when there was masses of people and it was backsides on seat. And you found sort of as it moved on from then, and I went on to do I started off on an oil project and then went on to convoys, and I spent about 3 years on convoys, and that was sort of a meat grinder. You saw sort of people within months left because it was just a meat grinder, or amount of people who got killed and injured. But it was sort of that transition away from just bulk volume of people to sort of, if you wanted to move up and progress in the industry, you had to be qualified, you had to have someone that set you apart, and you could sell yourself on and sort of particularly understand what the security risk game was and sort of be able to do more than just a bum on a seat or man a gun or drive a vehicle.
then did Africa as well in the security sense?
Yeah, a couple of brief trips out to West Africa way, Nigeria and whatnot, and did a couple of courier jobs. Moving packages. Did a short ball one for one of the French-speaking countries again, just going out to mining sites in West Africa again. There's this sort of a weird sort of mixtures. You had sort of on the UK side, you had obviously Armour Group was the big one, Sterling, people like that, and then on the French side, you had Geos and sort of those sort of companies again.
Total.
Yeah, who sort of ran the two sort of security company sides. Obviously now there's a lot more smaller ones and a lot of obviously again companies working direct and hiring people.
Yeah, we worked with Legionnaires in Yemen years ago. I think they were all Total.
Yeah, it was Certmire when it ran the port. Again, it was a strange quirk. Was that I think remember I knew a lot went to Certmire around the port, sort of strange way, because Yemen was sort of never a French speaking sort of ex-colony. But yeah, there used to be a lot used to work the Yemen side and a lot.
Difficult place to work then. I can imagine it's a very easy place to work.
Yeah.
Challenging, mate. Then you went into NHS briefly.
Yeah, so I sort of went Iraq doing convoys and prep security about 4 years. That sort of transition towards the end, sort of the end of 2008, when there was sort of the calming of things in Iraq. Went across to Afghanistan, worked on the EU police mission, then worked on a couple of other projects, sort of out in sort of the depths of Kandahar and whatnot. And again, that was sort of quite an unusual one. It was a police training centre getting built, and it was literally in the middle of nowhere. And we literally had a tiny little ESCO perimeter. The chief police used to come every month, sign for his bribe check. Used to watch him robbing trucks at night on the highways, and then they'd shoot at us. And again, we were in Kandahar. A suicide bomber hit our compound one night, came in. But again, it was sort of wide and vast experience. Sort of, and again, a lot of the projects I worked in Afghanistan was living out with Afghan nationals, sort of never sort of ones based on military compounds and bases. And again, sort of went from there to Algeria, worked in oil and gas for about 4 years. And then thought I wanted to try my hand in the UK security industry, obviously that compliance side of it, understanding the regulations and whatnot, and sort of how that side of the industry works. So yeah, I saw a job going as a security investigator in the NHS at my local NHS trust, and went into that and worked for an acute care trust. I had a very good boss who was a similar background, British military, worked overseas, and then and again was very keen on education and qualifications. So I worked for a couple of years on that.
That's when you did the course with us, wasn't it?
I was still in Algeria, so just before I was leaving Algeria, yeah, and I did the course and then finished that, and obviously then did the MBA passageway with the frontier part. The NHS again I found was very strange, very very sort of different again, because again weird to conventional security. You haven't got a perimeter. Yeah. Everybody's sort of welcome and allowed in, and then you've got to deal with them once they're inside. And again, the competing challenges of such a huge workforce, the technological systems, access control, CCTV, infectious diseases. We had nuclear medicine laboratories, managing all that, violent patients, liaising with authorities. Remember, we had a terrorism scare one night, that thing. So it was massively wide, sort of the COVID, when that happened, COVID protesters, all those sorts of things. And again, even now, managing your sort of insider threat and all that sort of thing.
You've done some stuff, like so diverse, your background. Like generally, that's obviously we couldn't have a better person running this project. Please don't leave us.
Yeah, please don't.
I mean, I picked up for my dissertation, the MBA, randomly. I ended up working with midwives in HS, and I did a project on lone worker devices, and sort of did a lot of time working with community nurses and midwives about sort of what they do now. And it was a weird thing where people invest in technology because they think that will solve a problem. And NHS was a key area. They decided way back 10, 50 years ago, NHS England, they give everybody these lone worker devices. They take with me if they have a problem, push this button. And these were like ID card holders. But they'd given these out, and no one had ever said to midwives, what do you do for a job? Quite of delivering babies. Can't have something around your neck when you're delivering a baby. Yeah. And so we were spending like 150, 200,000 pounds a year in NHS, and no one was using these things. Oh. They'd been lost. You couldn't find where they were, what happened to them. So I went and met with them and did my dissertation, sort of meet with them, and no one ever asked them what do you do, and so I sat with them. Common sense approach, they were using things like the buddy system, telling us where they were going between themselves, sharing information. So it was saying, actually, they are using a system. See, this technological system doesn't solve a problem, you've created another one. But actually, we could look at those who want it, getting like a key fob thing, because their biggest risk is crashing a car at 2 a.m. ice. They're going to get a baby kicking them, different to kettle of fish. So it was working with people like that. It was down to, working. We then moved to like building, we had solar farms on our sites. So it was building things like that, working together, drones, integrating these sort of technologies. And again, working a lot with the police, designing out crime, police counter-terrorism, security advisors, sort of that sort of thing. Because again, we had infectious diseases on site, nuclear medicine. So again, it was, and the biggest thing to me was, again, with security, it wasn't that veil of secrecy of, don't ask us, it's hush hush. It was the more open and engaging you were with people, the more allies you could build, and the more people would actually see the value in what you were doing. And actually sort of, to me, that biggest thing was that pro-security culture. The more people see it and don't see security as guards and gates and just people who go, hush hush, you don't need to know, the more they see it adding value to their lives or improving things, the more they buy into it and more people see a need for it. So in the end, we were doing things like new developments, we'd write security plans for it, which would be quite standard, but they were used to get BREEAM credits, for the development side of it, to get, efficiency credits and environmental credits. So other departments saw the big value of having people involved and who actually knew what they were doing, understood security risk management, putting together theories and designs and working together, building up systems, access control, seating, layered security measures of how that all fitted together to keep people safe and assets safe and managing that.
It's a lot of what you've done there. You bought into, the current embedded contract you're on for us now, which is, that's why you're a perfect fit for a lot of reasons, but even that, having that skill set as well, mate. But yeah, we could obviously talk for hours, mate, about the Legion and what you've done career-wise. I think we'll have to get you back to do a bit more on your transition from the police and then into your career, because there's some really insightful parts there, mate. But
brilliant, mate. Yeah, love that.
Learn loads there, and I think a lot of people enjoy that one. But thanks for your time, mate.
Thanks a lot.
Mega.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.